interview this week, Mrs. Barbara Triumphi talks about issues affecting journalism in Nigeria and the globe. Mrs. Barbara Triumphi, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, the first World Conference of the International Press Institute has just concluded. What has been your experience like?
It has been an impressive event here in Abuja. We have been able to listen to some of the most respected journalists, editors, publishers from the country, from the rest of Africa, and join them in conversation with many of our members worldwide. And the impressive things has been to notice how similar the problems are everywhere in the world that we're dealing with, so how solutions also need to be identified that work for all of us.
What are the similar problems you talk about?
The similar problems is the level of pressure that we receive from governments, mostly, and this pressure is made possible by the fact that a lot of the audiences also have lost trust in the mainstream media and make it very easy for those who want to clamp down on press freedom to do so. The loss of trust is the biggest problem that we see all over the world. We are losing our audiences. The mainstream media, mainstream news media is not the main source of information for the people in most countries around the world, and we need to find a way to convince them that news, quality news, is relevant.
You know, the theme of this Congress is, or rather was, why good journalism matters.
Absolutely.
You know, so what, in your view, how can Nigerian journalists create good societies using good journalism? Because in the first place, you wonder, what is good journalism?
Well, good journalism, I think, is the type of journalism that can operate completely independent from any pressure, be it political, economical, or of any other type. Is the type of journalism that can, where journalists can go out and report the news without fear of retaliation, without fear of losing their jobs if they report a news, a fact that they were not supposed to report for whatever reasons, and is the type of journalism that holds anybody who is in power accountable. But also beyond that, good journalism is the one that can explain to our audiences what are the important information for them, what are the financial processes, the economic processes, the political processes that in the end influence their lives. And the good journalists need to be able to explain this to the audiences in terms and in words that they can understand, and therefore use this information to take informed decisions in the moment they go to vote or they cast their support for the one or the other political leader.
When you see several encumbrances, you know, coming to journalists in the line of duty, when it comes to investigative journalism, they face pressures.
Immense.
They face pressures to actually stop the story, stop investigation, pressures from government officials, pressures from security, fear for their lives or their families. You know, how does the journalist forge ahead of this and ahead of all of these pressures and do what he ought to do, what he must do?
The pressure on investigative journalists is very common everywhere. At this Congress here in Abuja, we showcased the examples of two investigative journalists who lost their lives because they were investigating state corruption, mostly. These are two shocking cases. One is a woman journalist, Daphne Caruana Galicia from Malta, and the other is a young journalist called Jan Kuciak from Slovakia. In both cases, journalists had been threatened before. They had received warnings, but they felt that on one hand, their profession was more important, and secondly, they also felt that in the moment they can expose this level of corruption, in the moment the information is out, this will protect them. But clearly, for somebody, it's easier to deal with the negative publicity that comes from the death of these journalists than dealing with the facts that these journalists were about to reveal. So how can we support them? It's incredibly hard. It's incredibly hard. In many cases, Publicity will scare anybody who is planning on attacking them. So if those who plan to identify ways to silence journalists, very often being threats, physical attacks, attacks on the families, or attacks on the journalists themselves. If they know that they will receive a negative publicity as a consequence, then they will refrain from doing this. And that is what IPI is about. Whenever we know of any journalist who is under pressure, under threat, then the whole community moves and moves in support of that journalist. But in some extreme cases, even that does not help.
Yeah, so how does IPI, apart from publicity, how do you really encourage journalists across the board to rise above these challenges and continue work the way it ought to be done?
Yes, their profession is extremely important, but no single news is worth their lives. And no single story is worth their lives. So they need to be extremely careful. So on one hand, we teach journalists to assess the level of danger. And so they are able to really understand when they can afford to continue and challenge their enemies, and when they should stop. Why are journalists being attacked around the world? Because the perpetrators know that they will never be brought to justice. The perpetrators know that there is complete impunity, and there will be no consequence if they attack, even if they kill a journalist. So we need to strengthen the justice system to ensure that they can operate independently from any other external force, be it a political process or any other external force, and so bring the perpetrators of crimes against journalists to justice.
One of the issues that resonated during the Congress was the issue of fake news, hate speech. So ahead of the 2019 elections next year in Nigeria, how can the journalists, play such a role, in this regard to stem this?
I think fake news and hate speech are two quite different things, absolutely. Dealing with fake news, I think one of the reasons why we have come to Abuja is really to send a very strong message that quality media, quality news matters, that news organizations like channels are those that are relevant and that will bring quality information to the people. And that's why when IPI comes to Abuja and we organize our Congress here, we aim at reaching and talking not only to the journalist community, but to all the audiences out there and letting them know, don't get your news out of some social media where you don't know the source of. Get your news out of media you can trust. And ideally, take a good variety of newspapers, because in the end, biases are part of the newsmaking process. So the more sources you have as an audience, the better. So that is with fake news, is really making our audiences aware of the difference between quality news and something that is not even news, is just fake. On the issue of hate speech, that is a completely different problem. IPI has organized, as part of the Congress, a workshop for journalists who will cover elections. The important thing about hate speech is that journalists learn to cover those political forces that use hate speech as part of their political propaganda in a way that is not promoting the hate speech itself. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge. The hate speech seldom originates within the journalistic community. Very often it's spread by the news media, because the news media cover political leaders who use hate speech as part of their political agenda.
Yes.
So how can the journalistic community cover this? Because it's important to make our audiences aware of the fact that politicians are using this type of propaganda, because in the end, hate speech is a type of propaganda, for their political goals. How can we make them aware without spreading the same message? And this is what our workshop was about. There are tools, it's complicated, but this is something that journalists can learn.
Well, thank you very much for your emails and tweets as always. Keep sending in your views and comments using the email address and Twitter handle on your screen. Also, be sure to share anything happening within your locality. Don't you forget, you can view the program on youtube.com/channelsweb/videos. Thank you for watching this week. I'm Gloria Umezike. See you again.